My name is Sarbjeet Nahal. I head up the thematic investing team at Bank of America Merrill Lynch Global Research. And what we're hoping to do over the course of the next hour is take you through some of the challenges and opportunities associated in and around the longevity economy. You'll all be familiar with the term demographic dividend. It's often used to describe the potential of societies with young populations. Millennials is quite a stylish term in this day and age. But there's another demographic dividend, which is opening up new markets and new opportunities, and that's the older demographic. This cohort of healthy, wealthy, and relatively active adults, which is growing around the world. We believe that as consumers, they offer substantial returns for companies, and as productive workers, they represent an emerging source of human capital. So our panel is going to explore some of the possibilities and some of the exciting potential around the longevity economy for all those interested in capitalizing on what we believe to be one of the greatest growth stories of our time. So I'm just going to quickly introduce our speakers. On the far right, you have Jonathan Cawley, who is co-founder of the Age of No Retirement. On my right, we have Professor Linda Grattan, who's Professor of Management Practice at the London Business School. On my left, we have Baroness Sally Greengross, OBE, President and Chief Executive of the International Longevity Centre UK, and a member of the House of Lords. And then on the far left, we have Jody Holtzman, Senior Vice President of Market Innovation at the AARP. Now, before turning over to our speakers, I'm just going to take you through a couple of slides. And so if I could ask if we could flip over to slide 17. In my role on a day-to-day basis, I deal with a lot of asset owners and asset managers, pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, long-only fund managers, hedge funds, as well as wealth managers and retail investors. And when I talk to them about aging, the most common refrain that I get is, tell me something that I don't know. People were aging 10 years ago, they're aging now, they're going to be aging 10 years from now. How do I make any money off the back of this? And the reality is that when we go in to present, slide 17 if you have it, the global aging.
The next one.
The coming tidal wave. Perfect. And the reality is that when you take them through some of the facts and figures around this issue, there always seems to be a look of shock on their face. We all know that we're living in one of the most remarkable transformations of our time from a demographic perspective, with the 60-plus population set to grow from about 901 million today to 2.1 billion. We also know that there's 83 countries that have fallen below the replacement rate of 2.1 children. And for the very first time in human history, as you can see on the bottom right of this slide, we're arriving at peak youth. The proportion of people who are aged over 65 is going to exceed the number of children aged under 5 for the first time in human history, and this is going to happen before 2020. We're also seeing that aging has become a universal phenomenon, and 80% of older people will be located in emerging markets by 2050. And we believe that preparing for this impending tidal wave is a pressing imperative for governments, for investors, for corporates, and for individuals. And some of the factors at play from a risk perspective are clearly the old age dependency ratio. This is the proportion of workers to retired people. It's fallen from 12 to 1 in 1950 to 8 to 1 today. It's going to fall to 4 to 1 by 2050, including 2 to 1 here in Europe. What we're also seeing is that global annuity and pension-related longevity risk exposure is as high as $25 trillion around the world. Age-related spending is making up 40% of government budgets in developed markets, and age-related costs could push up to 60% of sovereigns into speculative grade by 2050. The current economic environment, quantitative easing, low interest rates are exacerbating longevity risk. And at the end of the day, many individuals around the world are inadequately prepared for the coming crisis. Nearly 2 out of 3 employees around the world are not saving for retirement. And unfortunately, women, the young, and the poorly educated are at greatest risk. But where there's risk, there's opportunity, and this is what many of our clients are looking for. And if I can flip you over to page 18, the next slide, we believe that the silver economy offers a multi-trillion-dollar silver lining. Huge opportunities in the pharmaceutical and healthcare space. As you can imagine, 80% of older adults have at least one chronic condition, and the elderly account for 75% of healthcare spending in developed markets. Spending by the 60-plus cohort is projected to grow by $1.5 trillion over the next 10 to 15 years in developed markets alone. This is going to produce beneficiaries in a variety of spaces, including cardiovascular, cancer, dementia, arthritis, diabetes, as well as areas like teeth and dental care, vision correction, and incontinence. It's depressing, but the number 2 cause of institutionalization after dementia is incontinence. We're also seeing that up to $3 trillion is being wasted each year. And this means a focus and a shift towards better and smarter solutions, including managed care, cognitive computing and artificial intelligence, computer and robo-assisted surgery, gene editing, telehealth, and VR. Now, if I move you over to slide 19, we also believe that there's significant silver economy opportunities arising in a number of non-traditional spaces, so outside pharmaceuticals and healthcare. From a consumer perspective, the baby boomers account for 50 to 60% of consumer spending in developed markets, and we believe that the 60 plus demographics, consumer spending is going to reach $15 trillion by the end of this decade. 60% of spending in the US and close to 50% here in the UK. And the beneficiaries not only include the traditional consumer industries, but bucket list travel, fighting the physical signs of aging, home renovation, as well as, a little bit more depressingly, the death care industry. We're also seeing significant opportunities as well as risks for the financial services sector. We need to usher in an era of savings. We need to reiterate the growing importance of asset income in retirement. And this can benefit many insurers, asset managers, and wealth managers, depending on the country, whether they're in the accumulation or the decumulation phase off the back of these demographic trends. And finally, there's opportunities in terms of aged care. 87% of baby boomers want to age in place, a huge tailwind for the $500 billion senior living market. Now, if I can move you over to slide 20, what we're going to do now is move over to each of the speakers. And Linda, I'm going to start with you, if you don't mind.
Yep.
You've talked a fair bit about unprecedented increases in life expectancy, creating both challenges and opportunities for young people and older people, and bringing intangible assets to the fore. Could you take maybe a minute or two to take the audience through some of your beliefs in this space?
Yeah, sure. My field of interest has really been the trends that are shaping work, and I've written extensively about technology. But a couple of years ago, I and my co-author, Andrew Scott, began to write about something that we believe to be more important than technology in terms of shaping work, which is longevity. So our interest isn't just in the last 10 years or 20 years of life, it's actually in the whole of life. Because when you know that you're going to live longer, which everybody in this room will do, there are huge implications for how you live your life at every stage of your life. And let me just describe a couple of them. One implication would be that you will work a great deal longer. And we've got data on that. I can show it to you at any point in the conversation. But I think all of us, and especially those of us who are younger, I'm 60, so I'm not one of them, needs to be thinking that you'll be working until you're between 70 and 80. And that's what we tell our MBA students, that they've really got to think about working until their 80s. Secondly, that means you can't possibly work the same way that you do. So we think you'll see a major restructuring of life. And we also see new stages emerging. In the past, 2 new stages of life have emerged, and that would be teenagers and the retirees. We think many more stages will emerge, which aren't just for a few people, they're for many people. What might those be? Well, certainly we expect more people to build their own business at some stage in their life. We expect more people to go through exploration times when they travel or they do things that are going to excite and interest them. We expect more people to build portfolios where they deliberately balance different types of work. And we also expect more people gosh, my mind has just completely gone at that moment, to have transitions where they are transitioning between different types of people, types of being. And then finally, as you mentioned, we think intangible assets are going to be much more important, and we have a whole way of modelling intangible assets.
That's great. I'm going to move over to Baroness Greengross. One of your key messages over the last few years is that with understanding and flexibility on all sides, older people can be empowered to play a valuable and warranted role in support of the longevity economy. If you could take a couple of minutes off the back of that.
Indeed. Well, the economy, say in this country as an example, we must utilise the skills of older people. And I have examples of some companies, and an American one, which is across the world, is one example. That is McDonald's. And in a way, they are an example because they have more than 3/4 of their employees under 25, but the best restaurants that they have the highest age for employees. So their restaurants, which employ at least one person over the age of 60, have overall consumer satisfaction more than 20% higher than stores with nobody. And that's just one company. And we know, because of the longevity economy not being totally recognised, a lot of people over 50, in spite of the legislation here, can't really get into the economy. And retailers started to understand this before anybody else. Most people enjoy having an older person to help them in a do-it-yourself store, for example, because somebody with experience is more acceptable, particularly to women. But the UK consumers, even consumers who are frail, spend a total of £314 billion a year. And that's 43% of household spending. And we ignore them at our peril. And that we have to put right the constraints that make it difficult for them. Access to the internet, which training can help. We must train people. You can't expect an older person to stay in the economy with skills of when they were young. So it's up to employers to retrain, reskill, and then reap the rewards. Because if you employ an older person and they say they'll give you 5 years at the age of 60, they will. Whereas a young person will probably go after 1 or 2 years when there's a better opportunity. So employers find this very useful, knowing they've got those skills for 5 years, if that's what they say. Older people are very reliable in that sense. So and we know that if the 50 to 64-year-olds, and we're worried here about the 50 plus, who are actually having more problems than the 60 plus, but the GDP here could have been £88.4 billion higher in 2014 if we had used the resourcefulness as well of our older population. We can't afford not to. And the dependency ratio means that it's absolutely indisputable that the employment, the skills, the help of older people to keep our economy going is absolutely essential. And I can tell you about a few other worldwide businesses that have really experienced this, and they're wonderful examples of how their businesses grow, their reputation for responsible business, which I'm heavily involved in, grows, their acceptance in a local community grows if they take advantage of the older population, and this is right across Europe and indeed the world, the industrialized world.
That's great. Now, moving over to Jonathan, you've talked about moving past age segmentation and the so-called extra 10, and embracing an intergenerational approach and putting design-led thinking at the forefront of change and reaping rewards. So maybe you could just take us through some of your findings off the back of this.
Thanks, Rob. We take a very unusual approach, I suppose, and we're not focusing on older people. We're focusing on all people. Every day, all of us age, and we all hope to get older. The fact that people are living longer and healthier than ever before is a good thing, should be a good thing. Ageism is prejudice against your future self. So all these things point to us needing to think about things a little bit differently. I'm a firm believer that the perpetuation of trying to solve the old problem perpetuates ageism and stereotypes and keeps the divides and keeps us trying to solve categories of people. we look at things along design-led approach, so it's very much inclusive, open-minded, not so much blue sky, but involving different people from different sectors, different perspectives, different points of view, cross-sectoral. This is not a third sector problem. This is not a government problem. This is an opportunity for every sector. And as soon as we start realizing it in all age terms, I think the better it'll be for us. When retirement was popularized 60 odd years ago, life expectancy was actually less than the retirement age. So the minority of people got to retirement. And then conveniently from a financial, a macroeconomic perspective, they died on average 3 years later. So people were forgiven for doing nothing in retirement or pursuing leisure pursuits. But now 60 years later, that older type person has now moved beyond 60, 70, now approaching 80 and beyond. So old has moved, but in our deeply entrenched psyche as a society, we still label 60-year-olds as old people. Talk about pensioners, retirees, the elderly. And what we need to do is start looking at the extending healthy life expectancy, what we call the extra 10 years of healthy life that every one of us can now expect to have, more than our parents, grandparents, great-grandparents. And what opportunity that affords for businesses, for brands, for products and services. So it's not focusing on the 18 to 30, the 31 to 40, focusing on millennials, Gen X, Y, Z, boomers, and coming up with different products and services for them. It's looking at the healthy life expectancy. And so we set about giving ourselves this challenge, and we did a survey, 2,000 people across the UK, aged 18 to 99, and the oldest person was indeed 99. And what we found was quite astonishing. And in fact, if you want to bring up slide 1, you can just scroll through some of the slides. We asked questions in 2 categories. The first questions category was all around life's tensions. So how you experience your life in terms of the rapid pace of technological change, somehow the disappearance of time from your life, the stress of caring down, caring up generations, the stress of work, the stress of finance, and looking at all those tension points. And we asked people across all those ages, and the findings were almost, well, they were undeniable. If you go to the next slide, that there is so much commonality across the age, there is so much commonality of need and value that is regardless of age. All the graphs were pretty much flat line across from 25-year-olds to 65-year-olds. So what we found is that people don't see themselves as an age, but they see other people as an age. So why do you impart on other people what you don't see in yourself? When people, when they think back of, if they're 65, they think back of when they were 25, and they think that they haven't changed. Circumstances might have changed, but they themselves haven't changed that much. So we are imparting stereotypes and segmentation labels onto people that don't actually apply. So taking the sort of accelerated view, what this means to brands, big brands, what this means to product and service designers, customer services, workforce, and things like that. If you take a less age-segmented approach and an all-age approach, and you start to focus on the commonality of need and value, you find that there's almost untold opportunities out there if you start to include that extra 10 back in your economic business model.
Thank you, Neil. Moving over to Jody, you've said that some of the common wisdom among policymakers and politicians is that we cannot afford aging politicians. Well, Silicon Valley...
Aging people. We can't afford aging politicians either. But
it's often one and the same. Whereas Silicon Valley's seemingly singular focus seems to be on younger generations, such as the millennials. What do you believe is holding back greater entrepreneurial efforts and investment activity that could benefit older populations?
So it's really interesting. So my soundbite typically, and this is from a U.S. perspective, there's about 110 million people over 50 years old in the United States, about a third of the population. But it's only in Washington, D.C., where serving the needs of over 110 million people is called an unaffordable cost and financial burden. In the private sector, serving the needs of over 100 million people, let alone 110 million people, is called an opportunity. And depending on which lens you bring to the conversation, the unaffordable cost and financial burden lens versus the opportunity lens, it leads you into a completely different conversation. One of the problems in the private sector broadly, but also in Silicon Valley, are the myths. First of all, one of the myths is that 20-somethings create more companies than people in their 50s and 60s. And in fact, in the United States, in any case, I don't know really in Europe if it's the same, I'm not quite sure. But in the United States, people in their 50s and 60s start companies at twice the rate of people in their 20s, according to data from the Kaufman Foundation, which is a nonprofit focused on entrepreneurism. The other problem, and that we need to see when I ask venture capitalists, so my group at AARP, and AARP is an organization in the United States of 38 million members, right? We have about a third of the over 50 population. And when I talk to venture capitalists and ask them, well, how come you're not funding more startups that are benefiting older people? Not just targeting them, but creating products and services, to Jonathan's point, that are equally relevant and equally usable, and therefore penetrating the market across the age continuum with full optimization. One of the responses is, well, we haven't seen the exit. We haven't seen the company go public that's going to return money like a Facebook, like a Google. Now, there have been some companies. There was one company that was the first company in the United States to create an online marketplace for health insurance for Medicare-eligible populations, so people over 65. They had an exit of $435 million. Everybody's interested in the unicorn, though, has to be $1 billion. But there are few of those. So one of the things for us that are in this field is to figure out, how do we nurture that ecosystem? How do we contribute to it? How do we build market awareness? How do we put a spotlight on technology and companies that actually are benefiting folks and making money and returning multiples on investment? And also, another point related to what Jonathan was saying, and you have to put the consumer at the center of the innovation. This is something that is a challenge for engineers broadly, and even more so when it comes to older consumers. So when you think about doing that, then you're going to have products. So think of this: the Nintendo Wii, when it was first redesigned, was designed so Nintendo could capture younger video gamers. The idea was to broaden the market and capture kids that were young and then keep them loyal to the brand as they got old. And they redesigned the handset for a young hand and the tactile and physical capabilities of a young hand. What Nintendo didn't realize was that that was the mirror image of an old hand. And all of a sudden, unbeknownst to them, these machines start leaving the shelf and finding their way into assisted living facilities, nursing homes, where the program directors finally had a fun way to get residents physically active. Wouldn't it be better if you found that market on purpose rather than by accident? But it has to be conscious, and it's really incumbent on us to build that market awareness and provide that guidance so that the private sector can actually fulfill the potential that is clearly there.
So can I just add to that briefly? Being a design-led organization, we put design at the front of everything, and we just to reiterate what Jodie was saying, there's no such thing as people complaining because something's too simple to use or too intuitive. And so we need to put design really at the forefront and start designing for everybody rather than designing for 18 to 30 is different to 30 to 50 is different to 50 plus, etc. So completely agree with that sentiment.
Can I just add that what we need is intergenerational workforces.
Yeah.
Because I remember one of our big banks, the chief executive, saying to me some years ago when I was a bit of a lone voice saying these things, which now we know are essential, that the older person knows the history of the bank.
Yeah.
And you can not make the same mistakes, but you need the vitality and new ideas of the young. So a combination in your workforce of both is very good. Some of you will have seen the movie, The Intern. Has anybody seen it?
Yeah.
With an older person as an apprentice to a 26-year-old IT startup. And, that was just an illustration of what can happen, and a very good movie, actually, and a very positive one from that point of view. But I think we also haven't mentioned the huge service and care industry. And one of the United States and here biggest care companies employs older people, and really they have nearly all their caregivers 50 plus, and because it's flexible, because they understand the people they're caring for, they are the industry. And this is one of the world's largest care companies, and I advise them sometimes. So I think I think they have 3 people over 70 in their headquarters as value members of the team, but almost all of them are 50 plus, because they can work, even if they're carers or caregivers of family members, they can actually find the right time in a flexible workplace to give enormous loyalty and standard of care to a company and its team.
This is a huge area. In the United States, the gap between the number of people who will be in need of care and the availability of caregivers is 2 to 1 by 2020. So roughly about 117 million people will be in need of care in 2020 in the United States, and there'll be roughly about 50 million people providing care, 45 million of which are unpaid family caregivers. Only 5 million are paid caregivers at establishments like Sally was talking about. And what you do see, getting back to Sarbjit's question, is that even in the venture capital community, what are people looking for? They're looking for, where's the next growth opportunity? And this is an area where if you had said 5 years ago that 3 startup companies doing caregiving would have raised over $130 million, 3 companies in 2 years, $130 million, a couple of them with 2-3 rounds of investment from the top shelf of venture capital, Andreessen Horowitz, Oak HCFT, Draper Fisher Jurvetson. This is like the top shelf of Sand Hill Road, which is like, the premier VCs in Silicon Valley. You would have been laughed out of the room, right? But everybody's trying to find, where is that next growth opportunity? And what you're starting to see now is that people are finding this market from non-traditional areas. So people in the tech industry, just as they're applying it to healthcare, are also applying it to caregiving. They're applying it, so the term aging in place is one I find too narrow. We use the term connected living, because it's not just about aging, it's not just about being in place, it's really about living. It's about life, and life is holistic. And part of it has health issues, part of it is just social, and staying connected with family, with friends, with neighbors. Part of it is environmental, and do you have a community that allows you to walk and get to, recreation and things like that. Once you start framing it that way, and in fact segmenting markets through the lens of life, that's when these business opportunities really start to pop.
Sure. And I know we've seen it with regards to Japan, which is clearly the oldest country around the world, and they have one of the most ambitious budgets, governmental budgets, in terms of robots as well as artificial intelligence. 1/3 of that budget is specifically devoted to the elderly. Right. It's everything from the development of robo-taxi services, because older drivers tend to drive more conservatively, more safely, up to a certain point in time, their early to mid-70s. It's putting in place sensors and care bots to deal with people with dementia and Alzheimer's. It's working with Japan's leading auto companies and robot companies to develop machines that can lift somebody onto their bed or ultimately even change their diapers. So I think there's some very innovative stuff that's going on there.
Yeah, and what's interesting about Japan, our book, the book that I'm referring to, The 100-Year Life, is currently the best-selling book in Japan. And the reason it is not just because of the aging population, it's because each one of us, at whatever our age, has to prepare to be working into our 70s. I mean, that's just a simple fact. And to work into your 70s, you have to start preparing in your 20s. You can't suddenly, in your 60s, say, oh, guess what, I want to work into my 70s or 80s. Sally, you know this. You've got to actually be preparing for it. You've got to start building your intangible assets. And that's why when we teach at London Business School, or when I'm in Japan, we're talking to young people saying you need to build your intangible assets right now to prepare to work really for most of your life, because unless you're saving a lot, and our view is that if you're going to live to 100 and want to retire at 65, you have to be saving at least 25% of your salary from the moment you start working. Nobody is doing that. At least nobody we know is doing that. Certainly none of our MBA students are. And so that means you're going to have to work.
If I could follow up on that, just as an anecdote,
Yeah.
it's close to 40% of the Japanese population, young population, who believe that they're going to have to work until they die.
Yeah.
To put things in perspective.
Yeah,
But
and that's probably
well,
not far
yeah.
from the truth.
following up on some of the job
Yeah.
creation, employment issues that we've dealt with, we know about the challenges posed by the dependency ratio. We know that statutory working ages are on the increase around the world. We also know that in major markets, 70% of pre-retirees want to continue to work into
Yeah.
retirement. Not necessarily because of the money, because of the stimulation and the satisfaction. And we all know that there's a huge skills retention challenge that we're facing around the world. What are some of the measures that both government and corporations, tangibly and intangibly, can put into place in terms of creating jobs for the older population, in terms of adapting working
Can I
working
just add one
arrangements,
additional thing?
and training and retraining? Please.
Just another point, and shrinking workforces.
Yeah, the younger people,
Right.
yeah.
Economies don't grow that don't have population growth and workforces that grow.
Yeah.
And so that's a challenge, particularly in the West. And so I don't want to dominate, but just to add that.
Yeah, imagine being in France right now. I haven't got the data to show you, but there's countries in the world right now where a huge proportion of the people over 55 are not working. I mean, it's just horrific. You know,
Right.
the tax burden, it's just crazy. So what are corporations doing? Well, we're actually just about to start our next research project on that. So if anyone is interested, please get in touch with either myself or my co-author, Andrew Scott. Actually, they're doing very little. And Sally, you know this, that we keep coming back to the same examples, don't we? McDonald's, and actually it's interesting, Sally, that you use the word over 60. I mean, this is not, you know, BMW. There's just so few examples. And actually, it's a huge problem both for governments. Andrew and I, and I'm sure others have Sally, have been, before Brexit, we were in and out of number 10 and Treasury the whole time talking about this, because it was obvious governments have to change and corporations have to change. Companies are being incredibly slow to change. And so you will have to see a large-scale change.
Well, this is what I said to you before
Yeah.
we came here, that success for this kind of panel would be for us to be replaced by chief execs of multinationals and be sharing with you what it is that they're doing in order to take advantage of the fact that people are living longer, healthier, more productively than ever before, what they're doing in the workforce, creating multi-generational teams, what they're doing in managing their alumni resources, because most of the organizations show people the door, and sometimes as early as 55 and say, there you go.
So many of you are in companies which ask you to leave at 55.
It's crazy.
Most of the
Can I just
city
give you
companies.
Another example. I came here from Fujitsu, where I'm on a responsible business board with them, and they're the company of the year now in this country, and of course they're everywhere. Fujitsu, they're a huge technological company, as you know, and they are brilliant because they are actually exploring all these different possibilities, and of course they're in reality a Japanese company with its satellites all over the world. And they are really taking this on board, and I congratulate them on that. And through the ILC, and David is here who works with me, we are forecasting the future in the light of demographic change. So our job is to help people, employers, trade unions, everybody, government, public sector as well as the private sector, as to what people must do if we're to benefit from the aging of the population, and we can, because we all have examples of brilliant practice, and that's what the ILC does. So we collect these, and we're in 19 countries around the world now, and so we can actually see what is happening and work together to actually find that this is a challenge, but if you go to it with a positive attitude, we can beat the challenges. Then it's a blessing, because there's a huge industry there, both employment and in service provision and in retailing and in distribution, in every service sector, every sector. And I learned so much, say, from Canada and Australia, because they're really good at some of these things. So we can all learn, and we collect that sort of research. We collect all the data. So, you know, we can help through the ILC to find out what you need to know.
The strange thing is, though, Sally, is that there's so much burden of evidence. There's so much demographic evidence out there. I was at the Economist conference last week entitled Aging Societies, and somebody we were both there, and somebody stood up in the audience and says, I've been attending these for 30 years and I never learn anything, because everybody's saying we need to, and very few people are saying we have, and this is what we've done, and this is what the benefit has been. And we find this enormously frustrating, the lack of evidence out there. And we started, we collaborate now with the Helen Hamlin Centre for Design, which is part of the Royal College of Arts. And we've made a bold move in I don't know how many of you are familiar with the 7 Principles of Universal Design, popularized by Ronald Mace in 1985. And they are almost the untouchable principles. Well, we've decided that they're outdated. I mean, they were in fact designed or established in a pre-internet age. And so given the modern technology and how much it controls and runs our life, how much we depend on it, we have redeveloped those into the 10 principles of intergenerational design. And the interesting thing is that we took these to the 2,000 people in the survey, and we asked them to what extent they felt that these 10 principles were important in being part of the products and services and processes that they experience on a daily basis. And if you can go to slide 5, I think, you will see that for each 10, again, there's a flat line. If those graphs there, between 20 and 70, they all said 90% approval rating for each of those 10 universal design principles. And then we asked them, to what extent are those same 10 design principles evident in the products and services and processes you experience every day? And only 16% saw evidence of them. So you look at the gap of where we think we should be from an intergenerational perspective and where we are. And that gap, that's the opportunity. Not only have we got more people to address with our products and services and campaigns, we're not doing that. But there's evidence now that this is what people are asking for.
And if I could just leapfrog off the back of that, I think, from a product design perspective, or Jody, from your VC perspective, tech is disruptive in all of our lives, and we can see that, some of the fastest growth for YouTube is coming from older consumers who are using the instructional videos to put things together, through to an iPad being as equally intuitive for my 2-year-old nephew as it is for my 82-year-old father. What are some of the exciting developments that, Jody, you're seeing on the VC front in terms of where the money is going, focused on this older population? And Jonathan, from a product design perspective, how is tech disrupting, revolutionizing, facilitating?
The most amazing thing in the research, excuse me, that we found was that technology is viewed equally by young and old, as far as being both advantageous and something that they absolutely depend on, as well as being something that they find frustrating. The lack of interoperability, the pace of change, the fact that they no longer have spare time because they've always got a phone in their hand. They're always doing something. And this, again, was felt equally across the ages. So I think that viewing older people as tech illiterate is dangerous and wrong. I think viewing older people as having too much time on their hands and they're idle is, again, incorrect. And the commonality of need, it really needs to go back into the mindset of the designer, figuring out how it is that they can address needs and values that are common across all ages.
Can I just...
Yeah, go ahead, Sally.
Well, it was a very quick... I chaired for the Design Council in this country an awards scheme on design for an ageing society. And nearly all the winners were in IT, they were tech. But what we haven't talked about very much anyway is that when people do get a serious illness like dementia, which is really across the world is now the biggest challenge, which takes many years, then there's an enormous industry that is awaiting really investment and people to get in it, the care industry. And some of the winners of the design, which is the National Design Council Awards, did address things like that. Because, for example, smell. You can actually get people to think about food if you use design properly, and you can have smell of good food. Or, you know, when you go to a supermarket, they have bread making. You smell it as you go in, which makes you want to buy bread. Well, all of that can be translated to enabling people who don't bother about food to think about it and to remain healthier. And the retailers can design their stores differently so that colour isn't dazzling, isn't difficult. And even for very frail older people, there's an enormous industry there. But, you know, we're thinking about positive older people, part of the major economy. But recipients of services are also part of a big, big economy. And that's, I mean, sadly, but that is growing as well. And so a lot of these designer winners were in that economy, which is growing fast, and the Japanese are a good example of how that's growing, and they've done brilliantly with robotic care and things of that sort.
So we've seen, the low-hanging fruit is healthcare and health-related things, right? Health conditions, chronic disease, index high for age. It's just a reality. And the lifespan, has increased, over the last 115 years, 16 years, an additional 30 years added to the lifespan. But people get sick at the same age. We're just learning to be sick, and science has allowed us to be sick for longer, right? Diseases that would have killed us now are just chronic, and we can manage them. My father's in his 9th year of remission from lung cancer. He's 89 years old. The man should not be on the planet. We're very glad he is. He's on the corner every morning, getting his hard rolling coffee and flirting with the women. In any case, so healthcare is one area. What is really interesting is you're starting to see the proliferation of various technologies around sensors and everything they enable as the price comes down, which with Moore's law is applied in this marketplace as well. I personally believe, though, that we are 5 to 10 years from really exciting things. Okay. And to me, I'm what's referred to as a Trekkie. I love Star Trek, and my touch point for the future of technology has always been Star Trek. The first Bluetooth communicator that anybody has ever seen was 1965 in Lieutenant Uhuru's ear on the bridge of the Enterprise. Not only was the technology, trend-setting, but it was an African-American actress who played Lieutenant Uhuru. The first tablet I ever saw, 1988, Captain Picard reading Shakespeare on his tablet, right? Virtual reality, the holodeck, right? You're in these places talking, to brilliant people in history. All of these things are now actually coming to bear. But the most important thing of relevance to this space is voice command and voice recognition. When you can just speak into the air and say, computer, put my daughter up on the screen. Nothing else. And through artificial intelligence and virtual reality and better, broadband and all of these things. So where is that happening? The Amazon Echo, I believe, is the first of many breakthroughs. And we've already seen, because Amazon views the Echo and Alexa as a platform and has put out the APIs and software development kits to the marketplace, you're now seeing, up in Seattle, there's a new accelerator for startup companies that is solely focused on building on the Amazon platform. And we've started to see its application to caregiving. It takes the friction out. You don't have to push buttons, you don't have to read anything. It's just you have this artificially intelligent tool that allows you to make appointments, to order a car, to speak with your children, your family, your caregiver, your doc, your nurse. All of this is really going to get to the point where all of us are literally on the bridge of the enterprise and able to just call out and see reality change for us in a way that's going to improve, quality of life.
And if I could just, with good reason, one of the topics that's on many of our investor clients' minds, it's on the front pages of the newspapers, is this whole question of inequality. And those of us in and around this room, every 4 to 5 years, we're living 1 year longer. It's just happening. When it'll peak, we don't know. But when we look at certain groups like lower middle class Caucasian males in certain countries like the U.S., their life expectancy is declining. Right. We have 20 to 25% of the elderly who are living, and women, who are 20 to 25% of the elderly who are living in poverty. Is this an issue that's being adequately tackled? And is it potentially one of the reasons that older populations have been so vocal off the back of
that was a rhetorical question, right?
I'll throw it out there.
On
issues like Brexit,
it's clearly not being addressed, and one of the ironies of the American healthcare system is that actually low income folks have better health coverage than people who are middle class. So if you're low income, Medicaid will pay for caregivers in your home. If you make $25,000 to $75,000 a year, Medicare does not cover that. So that's a huge cost out of your pocket or your family's pocket. So it's clearly not happening. And it also, added on top of that are the issues of isolation, challenges to mobility. I was at a session that the Chief Technology Officer of Health and Human Services, the Department of Health and Human Services, organized together with NASA. And they were talking about health challenges under extreme environments. And it was organized by IDEO, and IDEO's methodology is to look at the workarounds that people create under extreme conditions and look within those workarounds for the nuggets that can be generalized and taken to scale. And so they were talking about isolation of astronauts. Now, certainly an astronaut is in outer space, clearly an extreme environment, and clearly isolated physically. But they're connected to hundreds of people. They can have a Skype conversation with children in an elementary school about an experiment that they're doing on the space station. For an old person, though, they can live in a city surrounded by thousands of people. In fact, the Upper West Side of Manhattan, my parents live in a high-rise apartment building. There's thousands of people within feet of them, but they could be connected to no one. And so these are to me, these are places where there's opportunity to understand what are the factors that impact us as people, the need for human connection. Technology has to play a role in bridging these gaps, as I was saying, just people in need of care in the United States, 117 million versus 50 million caregivers. Technology has to play a role. At the same time, technology has to play a role that it doesn't isolate people further. It has to enable human contact as opposed to just being that mechanical, kind of response.
In Europe, the situation is very different because the industrialized European countries all have a universal health scheme of some sort, funded in different ways. But the cost of inequality just in this country is extremely high, and the ILC has an affiliation agreement with University College London, and Professor Michael Marmot, with whom I was doing some work the other day, and he's demonstrated across the world the cost of inequality. And I mean, if you just take London and you go on the underground train, on the tube, and you can cut a year off people's life as you go from the northwest down to every station is a year off life expectancy, because these are the poorer areas. And the cost of treating people because of inequality with illnesses as they age is incredibly high. So we have to, for the good of everybody, we have to get rid of some of those inequalities. It's absolutely essential. And it is very, very costly to have them. I mean, that's the thing that people in investment need to know. It's not just neglect and it's nasty morally. It's also nasty economically, because it is an enormous cost, especially in Europe, where you have schemes which look after everybody regardless of whether they can pay or not. So those people requiring huge amounts of care are an enormous drain on the economy, let alone everything else that we know about inequality. So, it's not just being nice, it's being real, that we have to deal with that.
Great. And why don't we open it up to questions? If we could just ask that you wait until the microphone comes your way. We have one here.
Hi, Davide De Agostino from the BT Pension Fund. Just following on inequality, I think there's another point that was just mentioned at the beginning of this talk, is about the inequality, I would call it generational inequality. So the fund I work for is a defined benefit pension scheme, and most of people my age, my late 30s and early 40s, and younger people are essentially members of defined contribution schemes that, as you said before, you're not saving enough for retirements. And many people started to talk about a time bomb that might potentially explode over the next 15, 20, 30 years. What do you think about that?
Well, I'm speaking on behalf of my co-author, who's an economist. But actually, in our book, The 100-Year Life, we make it absolutely clear there's a time bomb. And we're actually saying to anybody, really, who's your age, you have to, A, be prepared to save more, and B, be prepared to work longer. And those, or you have three choices. You can save more, work longer, or retire on a lower percentage than your final retirement. So at the moment you say, well, people can retire on 50% of their final income. In fact, actually, that's quite hard to do. Most people find that difficult. So our view is, just as you said earlier, you have to encourage people to save more right the way through their life, and we have to encourage them and create contexts in which they can work longer. And they have to prepare to do that from your age onwards, because there's no way. Andrew in the book calls it a Ponzi scheme. He thinks that the sort of pensions that we've got and that you're giving to people at BT is a Ponzi scheme, and they are. And they're not going to, BT is a small company sitting on a very large pension scheme. You know that, how many people you're now paying pensions to. It's just unattainable. It is the same. I'm very lucky. I'm a university professor, so I will retire actually this year if I wanted, which I won't, on 60% of my income. I mean, that's completely ridiculous.
2 years ago.
No, mine is still 60%. Nice try. So yeah, I mean, it's completely ridiculous. And in terms of intergenerational inequality, and the government has launched a commission on intergenerational inequality, there's no question that we were extremely fortunate, and the idea of a pension that's going to kick in at the age of 40, at the age of 60, is just not a proposition, and there will be, well, as you rightly say, you sit on a pension fund, you know this.
I mean, people in the United States over 50 control 80% of net worth. So.
This is coming back to the intergenerational opportunity or conundrum. People at school need to not now just be taught maths and English. They need to be instilled with the fundamental building blocks of a dynamic working life.
From the beginning.
So it's resilience, it's adaptability, it's entrepreneurship. You can't finish school, go to university, get a job for life. You are going to reinvent yourself, either by choice or be forced to, numerous times through the course of your life. The retirement model no longer exists. It doesn't exist now because people live so long in that retirement space that they can't do nothing, and they don't do nothing. And there's very few people that sit around for 2 decades spending their savings. So we need to wake up to the redesign of life in its entirety, not just the redesign of retirement.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah. We've got another couple of questions here at the front.
Hello, my name is Mike Mansfield. I do retirement research for Aegon in the Netherlands. And earlier this year, we brought out a report on flexible retirement, looking at the fact of many of the things you said. People want to work longer. Sometimes it's a little bit difficult for it. But the one group I find most difficult in writing the report to have recommendations for was people who have physical jobs, who may find it more difficult to be able to work.
Yeah.
So what advice would you have to help those people feel more included or feel that they have more options and feel a little less pushed outside?
We have some examples of very good practice from corporates across Europe particularly, where they have changed the pattern of work. I mean, if you take the motor car industry as an example, robots actually build the cars. There's no reason at all now and you know, mining, coal mining and so on has stopped with all the personal tragedies that produced. But it does mean that the workplace, even when you're producing, I mean, farming is a case in point, it's not as arduous as it used to be. And in many instances, you can adapt that. So we do have examples at the ILC of good practice where older people can be in manufacturing. For example, I know some Swedish companies changed the way things are made so that the older employee has a personal task which is carried through. It's not just on an assembly line. We don't really need assembly lines anymore because machines can do all of that. So it's keeping up with the really important changes which benefit disabled people, people who haven't been particularly schooled in the technology to work better. We just have to use those and spread the knowledge. One of the things, it's really our duty to spread the knowledge of good practices which encourage people of all ages and abilities to work together. BT is a very, very good example in many ways. You're not as bad as you seem to be suggesting. I think BT is one of the good examples of practice, and you don't lose your caregivers, your carers, for example.
Can I just add a little bit to that? Because we're doing some work with some organisations, Barclays is one, where you're looking at job role deconstruction. So it's the career job and looking at it in task form. That's the one side. The other side is taking skills inventory of people, what their capabilities are, and looking at the aptitude, the desire, and the midlife career review that was a research project funded by BIS and run by NIACE. It doesn't have to be in mid-career. It could be any stage in your career where you have a better appreciation of what you are good at doing and be able to fit better with what. Now, I was shared a panel with Ian Duncan-Smith 2 years ago when he was still the head of the DWP, and he presented Fuller Working Lives. At that session, a fireman jumped up out of the audience, red with rage, saying, "I'm forced to retire, my pension is lousy, all I know how to do is put out fires. What are you going to do for me?" And he had absolutely no appreciation of his worth other than putting out a fire. And there are so many more skills than a fireman accumulates over the course of his career. And we need to find better ways to enable people to understand. Maybe it's using the Citizens Advice Bureau or something available in the community where they can go in and get an MOT of their skills and match that with what it is that they want to do and jobs availability. So,
can I just say one last thing? I agree with everything you're saying. One thing that I've seen is that people who are in this category are sometimes very vocal people in terms of voting, and in many countries have voted to retain the retirement age where it is, rather than actively engage in the discussion where we all need to be in terms of a richer, longer working life.
Right.
But to get what Baroness Greenwood said in terms of getting that message out there and sharing the knowledge, I think that's a challenge for all of us, and I'm not sure. It would be a hard thing for us to find an answer for.
Yeah. We need to tell better stories of the people who are doing things.
Yeah, we do. Role modeling.
It's the case study. So what it is that we're going to... Individual role models, actually. We're going to pioneer with Barclays next year. We want to convert that into impactful storytelling that everybody can benefit from, everybody can learn from, whether you're a citizen or an employer or a service provider.
I know we are at time, but we've got one last question in the back there. I see a hand flashing up.
Thank you. I guess the question is more of a statement, but also a question to the panel. It seems like the older, I would say, strata, the 65 plus, are about, and still are probably today, enjoying almost a blocking vote power, politically, almost economically, particularly in the United States. The question is this: we need to shift our effectively social economic contract away from the 65-year-old retirement age to something even further, more aggressive. The question is that age strata doing anything to actually help the younger age generation? Meaning, is that voting power getting transferred into something more productive, more longer term? What do you think?
So I think there's two levels. One is just objectively, right? So what are the economics things? So you have a study that was on your chair, and one of the takeaways from that is just the consumer spending and this is the United States, but I think it does carry over for Europe. Consumer spending in the United States, you have 30% of the population accounting for 42% of total U.S. GDP, right? Generating 90 million jobs. Well, those jobs aren't just for people over 65, over 50. Those are jobs that benefit society as a whole. To Jonathan's point about stories, that story needs to be told. People need to understand that intergenerationally we are all benefiting, from each other objectively, but then there has to be a subjective and an explicit conversation about how the generations do benefit each other. And it's socially, it's in our families. Families are by definition intergenerational, right? And so how do we start to take those personal experiences and start to generalize those? I know the lessons that I got from my grandparents, I still cite them today, whether they were business, whether they were life, whether they were, coming and taking care of me so my parents could do other things as caregivers, babysitters, and me calling on my parents to take care of my kids when they were young. I mean, these are all things that actually show the human, at the human level, how intergenerational, interaction, is beneficial on so many levels. But the stories, to Jonathan's point, they have to be told, and they have to be, those connections, those dots have to be connected.
Well, one of the things that I'm very heavily involved in is obviously politics, and I think it's very important that our politicians really know that there is now a feeling of intergenerational unfairness. So I head up an all-party, that is all our political parties group, looking at intergenerational fairness, and a lot of the work at the ILC here is connected with that sort of issue, because it's terribly important that young people do not feel that the older generation are getting an unfair advantage over them. And most older people, and I agree with you, grandparents don't want their grandchildren to be unfairly treated, but you need fact, you need real evidence base to get this right. So what we do at the ILC in planning the future in the light of demographic change is to bring evidence to bear where there is unfairness, because we look across the life course, and we will not be unable to express that. We're not a campaigning group just for one generation. We look across the life course, and I think instances of unfairness, which are beginning to emerge, are really important. We won't be taken seriously with just a lobby group for older people. That's a different role. That's the charities' role. An evidence-based policy role is very important, which is why I concentrate a lot in Parliament, working with the House of Commons. As, we're always together on this sort of issue across the political parties to look seriously at where there is a dangerous trend, and that has to be brought to a halt. And most older people would agree with that. They wouldn't realise that this is happening, and it is in some fields.
I mean, my generation has to fight to ensure that the benefits that I look forward to will be there for my children. And my children need to know that I will fight for that.
Okay. And with that, I think we have to wrap things up, and we're well over time, but I wanted to thank Jonathan, Linda, Sally, and Jody for their time today. Hopefully to help you better understand how this multi-trillion-dollar risk can become a multi-trillion-dollar opportunity. To also stress, please provide your feedback on today's session via the mobile app, and the video will be available online via the Milken Institute YouTube channel. So thank you very much for your time today.